We are back with Once in Future, a beautiful, chaotic, batshit crazy story about stories. If you are not a fan of pure chaos, violence, and action, just leave, because this story is not for you. We're going to see how things will play out if King Arthur himself was the demon god. So please like and subscribe so you don't lose track of all my videos. Alright, let's get into it. Okay, so we pick up our story and where we left off in the last video. Our boy, Duncan, being threatened by his grandmother, and the first thing he asked her is why? Why didn't you tell me about all of this sooner? Why did you keep it to yourself till now? And she simply replied back, I did it for your state of mind. Imagine how messed up your life would be if you were afraid of your own shadow, afraid of all the monsters that lurked in the night. But he wasn't impressed because right now the only person he cared for in the world was pointing a gun at his back. This is not a better situation, grandmother. And what was with that monster, the questing beast? She just smiled. Well, you're going on your first quest. What did you expect? The way she was so straightforward and blunt was so funny. Anyways, they had arrived at their location, where King Arthur's remains stood, and right now they had to be quick because the wolves were here, standing at the entrance with the ladies of the lake. His grandmother told him not to make eye contact because that was rude. While they came through, the wolves were already ravaging the corpse or trying to open the casket of King Arthur, and he was pissed off that the lady he came with was not watching all this take place. This was a holy moment. This was a real moment you're supposed to observe, honestly. And when the coffin was open, they saw him, their king, their new king. In silence, she just carried the scabbard and dropped it next to her king. The scabbard who has the ability to heal everything to completion. So, he was going to be brought back. And right now, Granny had no time to threaten her grandson, giving him a machine gun because he is going to need it for what comes next. Because the king has risen. Without a word, he tried to communicate, but none of them spoke this dialect of English. Granny came through and saw, but what she saw shook her to her bone. This should not be. He should not be awake. The scabbard had already started regenerating his muscles. The king just stretched his hand and pulled out a sword from the wall. Whipping this sword, he was almost complete. The regeneration was slow, but he was healing. His heart had returned, his gut, his muscle. He was here, standing before his new subjects. They all bowed a knee, but he didn't care. Whipping out the sword, he grabbed one of their arms and drew blood. Imagine you are unable to move, and he just grabs you and draws blood with the rusty swords and tastes it. And with one taste, you ask yourself, why did he do that? Only for your king that you brought back to look at you and shout, Anglo-Saxon filth, and slice you in half. This guy was freaking ruthless, and Granny knew this because King Arthur protected England from invaders, Anglo-Saxon invaders. Anyone with their blood was fair game. He butchered everyone in this room. Everyone but this little lady. She offered up her hand for her blood to be tasted, and he tasted it, realizing that she was his kin. He smiled. You have come to your king. Watching all this play out, Granny was terrified because this was not what she expected. The king was back, and with his power, he demanded or called upon an undead army, equipping them with armory and weaponry. They were his knights. Rather, they were his foot soldiers, and they would die for him. But the little lady had prepared a knight for the king, a knight that would go look for the Holy Grail. And once Granny heard the Holy Grail, she had to get the hell out of there because that was another thing. That was a doomsday weapon. But she couldn't escape properly because her grandson kicked some rocks, gaining the attention of the king. Now they had to fight. But her grandson wielded a machine gun, so he just let the bullets fly. Granny, on the other hand, had some C4, a magical pack of C4. They had to run. Realizing that his granny was slow, he just said, nah, come here, picking her up. He ran with all of his strength. While Granny just blew up the freaking C4, which engulfed the whole cave, stopping King Arthur from coming out of this cave. But he wasn't bothered. He was disgusted at this weapon. That is not a weapon for a king. He opened up a portal and stepped through to go get his real weapon, Excalibur. Right now, they needed help. Granny needed a doctor, but not just any doctor, a doctor of history. But funny enough, Duncan's date was a doctor in history. And as you realize, destiny is real in this world. So that was no coincidence. Granny just said, let's go get her in your piece of shit car. She was rude, but that is why I like her. On their way to Rosie's apartment, she opened the door saying hello, but Granny had a Glock to her face because you're going to do as I say, or you're going to die. She really wasn't going to kill Rose, but she just liked pulling out the gun, so nobody has a reason to waste time. And she took them down to the catacombs where a chest was hidden, a chest directly stated for the next doctor. Granny needed Rose to see the contents of this box so she could just follow the mission without questions. And she opened it, only to find a letter addressed to her, saying, believe this woman, everything she says is true. Don't waste time. Because right now, time was important. They had to go fight, or the world they knew would end. Stepping into the holy ground, she gave Rose a candle and told her never to let it die. Because right now, she's the string that connects her and Duncan to the real world, just like Theseus and the thread. Right now, Duncan and her had to stop King Arthur from getting the sword, but they were too late. King Arthur was already there. Every single thing that could possibly go wrong has gone wrong. And right now, with one grip, he put out his magical sword, which transformed him and imbued him with power. He was in his final form, and he looked badass. And right next to him stood the pretty little lady and her son, the new knight. Granny saw this and realized that this was a make or break moment. Because he was pledging his loyalty to his new king, she had to stop him. Pulling out the box from Duncan's bag, she told him to hold still. He asked his grandmother, why is this grail so important? She made it clear that the grail is a catalyst for stories, and this world is haunted by stories. Every single story you have read is real. And once that grail comes to life, all of them come alive. So Duncan, please hold still. Don't make Granny lose her shot, aiming for this innocent kid's head.